I don't remember there ever being a time actually when I didn't want to be an artist. It was a decision almost from word go, and my parents were incredibly supportive of me as an artist. My dad bought me my first sketchbook when I was 6 years old, and he used to take me drawing out in the hills round about Scotland where I grew up. So it was always a very early decision for me. And my family moved to Lancashire when I was a teenager, a little town called Blackburn. Culture in Blackburn is it's a bag of chips on a Friday night and a game of football on a Saturday morning. You know, that's culture. But as I say, I'd always loved drawing, I'd always loved painting, and I used to draw cartoon characters and I used to make up my own comic books. And I actually had a job at a theme park in Lancashire called Camelot, which was a theme park on the theme of the Knights of the Realm and King Arthur. And there were these spectacular backdrops at Camelot, which I was involved with painting. These scenes, pastoral scenes of England at that time, you know, castles and mountains and trees and things like this. And of course, it's all entirely fictitious because that world didn't really exist as we imagine it now. But that got me interested in painting on a big scale. And of course, it got me interested in painting things that were somewhat fake or an exaggeration, or as Umberto Eco describes it, a hyper-real, something that's authentically fake. And I found that infinitely fascinating as a teenager, and I think it stuck with me in my painting practice. But I moved from A-level to a foundation course in Edinburgh, and at first, actually, I'd applied to the other art schools. I applied to Glasgow School of Art, and I didn't get in. And this was devastating for me as an 18-year-old, because I'd always been very successful in painting and top of the class and so on. And then to be rejected was quite a blow. But I applied to this course in Edinburgh, and on my interview, I was interviewed by the principal, Philip Archer, and we were talking about Paul Cézanne, who was a great hero of mine, and we talked about hyperreality, and we talked about all these things, and we had this really great connection at the interview. I was offered a place, and that foundation year absolutely made me as an artist. And with hindsight, I'm actually really glad that I didn't go to Glasgow straight away, because that foundation at Leith, well, it taught me colour theory, it taught me life drawing, observational drawing, gave me a deep respect for art history, which I've maintained since then, and it absolutely made me as an artist. And I really love that school. I now teach at that school, of course, so I'm now one of the tutors at the Leith School of Art, so the legacy continues. And Philip Archer is a friend. He's become a good friend through the years. So a great foundation in Edinburgh, and from then I applied to Glasgow again, and I got in to Glasgow. So I had 4 years at the Glasgow School of Art, and I was in Glasgow at a really interesting time. It was just after artists like Jenny Saville had been through and Douglas Gordon had been through. There was quite some discussion about the positioning of painting in contemporary art, and texts towards the death of the artist and the death of painting were bouncing around, so we had quite a lot of discussion about how painting holds its own in that sort of environment. And for me, that was infinitely frustrating, because I didn't really want to talk so much about paint. I just wanted to paint. You know? And I didn't want to justify painting. I just really wanted to make the stuff. And head of painting was Sandy Moffat at that time. In fact, he was head of fine art. And Sandy gave me some great advice on painting, and he was a dear tutor to me at that time. So 4 years at Glasgow, and then from there, actually, I moved into the charity sector. So I continued my practice in a part-time capacity, working for an organisation that was supporting artists of Christian faith. And I worked as a mentor for artists at that point, and worked in the charity sector for about 8 years. So I suppose during that time, carried on painting, had a studio, and after 8 years, well, I'd learnt a little bit about life. I met my wife at that point. We got married, and I was pregnant with Lily at the time. And I suppose I started to think, if I was going to have a career in painting as a long-term endeavour, if I was really serious about that, then really I needed to do something to get to that point. So I started looking towards MAs and applied to Wimbledon School of Art, And at that time, one of the tutors was Geraint Evans, and I really liked Geraint's painting and was hoping to have an opportunity to meet him and to talk about his painting. And he actually interviewed me for Wimbledon School of Art. I was interviewed with Geraint and Jordan Baseman, who's now at the Royal College of Art. And I was offered a place at Wimbledon and had a super 2 years on their part-time MA. And that gave me not just a rigour for thinking critically about painting, but it gave me the bug, again, if I can put it that way, for painting. And through that MA process, I realised that I really wanted to do this as a long-term endeavour. And that kernel that began as a wee boy of wanting to paint and not really seeing myself doing anything but that was fanned into flame through doing the MA again. So I suppose in a way it almost ruined my career going on the MA. I have this wonderful ruinous career as a lifelong ambition to be a painter. So these are paintings that refer to the tradition of trompe-l'oeil, and a very specific type of trompe-l'oeil painting from the 17th century from Northern Europe, a form called quodlibet, which translates as what you will. And the quodlibet painters would make paintings of objects that would just be thrown away, everyday objects, and they paint them as though they'd been thrown onto a table or onto a wooden floor, as if discarded, the kind of detritus of life that is just discarded. And I find that a really interesting approach to painting. One, because I'm very interested in things that we throw away and the objects that we surround ourselves with in life that say so much about who we are and what our interests are and where we're going to in life and where we've been and what's valuable in life, the things that we value. So a few years ago, I started making these paintings in this genre. And of course, it's still life as well, and still life painting concerns the things of everyday objects. And really, still life painting, it's about death, actually. It's about how objects are preserved, or objects that are painted at the moment that they're just about to turn. One thinks about the faded flower at that point where beauty is fleeting and just turning. Or one thinks about the apple or the fruit bowl that is overly ripe, the autumnal season of fruit that is now fading and away. So they concern these important questions of the fleeting nature of beauty, the nature of mortality, the type of questions that maybe we shy away from at the polite dinner party, but very important to be talking about. And so these paintings involve the question about the nature of life, death, the fleeting nature of mortality. So they're objects that they appear as though they're painted on a wooden surface. So that might be a floor, or it might be a table. And these particular paintings, I've chosen these objects because they're objects that have appeared in the studio at some point. And these paintings specifically have been made in the context of my residency at City and Guilds Art School, where I've been artist in residence for the last 6 months. So let's say a little bit about this painting that I completed towards the end of my residency here at City and Guilds. And it's a painting that falls in the quodlibet genre that we've been talking about already. And here we see various objects that have been left behind either by the students here at City and Guilds as part of their painting practice, or that have been left behind in my own painting practice. So we see painting rags that of course are part of the painting process but then become discarded in due course. We actually see my mobile phone here as well. We see paper aeroplanes and pieces of paper that if you come to my studio, you'll see litter the place, all over the place. We also see the masking tape, and of course every artist has masking tape in their studio. And what I've enjoyed doing here, as well as putting the masking tape to be painted as though it were painted onto a floor, and indeed we're looking at a floor, which in itself I think is quite interesting, that one looks at a painting on the wall, but of course we're looking at the floor, so looking over to something actually we'd be looking down on. And then there are various moments where, for example, the masking tape would come around the edge of the painting here. And I do that, it's a bit of a kind of painter's joke, if you will, as if to say that a painting isn't just about the surface, it's about the object, the painting object, and what happens around the side is important, that's valued. So no one's yet tried to pull it away from the side, but I suppose there's a possibility that someone might want to pull that away. And the images are very important as well. These are all They're paintings of cutouts and books and postcards, again, that have been left behind by the students, or that I've had in my own studio practice. So they're artists who connect with the genre of still life, but perhaps artists we might not associate with still life and with memento mori painting. So we have replications of paintings by Matisse, by Picasso, within early pop art, and painters who I love and who I reference in my work, as well as artists from the 17th century. And so we have these original paintings that then become reproductions. And of course, I've then painted them again. So if you will, they begin as original painting that then becomes digitalized image that's then printed, and then I've painted it again. So we have this sort of cycle of original to replication to original again. And indeed connecting with that idea that Umberto Eco writes about in Travels of Hyperreality, the idea of the authentic fake, something that presents itself as a fake or a reproduction, but it does that with a level of authenticity, if you will. There's something about the tangibility of paint as a material. There's something about the carbon, the atoms, the stuff of paint that to me connects with, well, the stuff of everyday life, the things that we surround ourselves with. Things are made of stuff. Things are made of materials. And there's something about within the digital realm, and not to the detriment of digital technology, because of course I've got an iPhone and I watch Netflix and I exist in the digital realm as well. I have an Instagram account like everybody else. But as a painter, I'm more interested in the stuff of things and materiality. And something happens when a digital reproduction is translated into paint. Something happens in the way that the light hits a painting and reflects off, that one sees the paint differently from when one looks at an image that's backlit on a digitized screen. Or when one looks at a painting that is, of course, an object. It's an item that exists. It has a three-dimensionality to it. You can go around the side and look at the edges of it. And indeed, when you look at my paintings, if you go around the side, sometimes little things happen that take you off the surface and round the edge to demonstrate that a painting isn't just surface, but a painting is dimensionality, and that it's an object in and of itself. So, I paint things that exist that are objects, but objects that are reproductions or replications that might exist in the digital realm, but in turn began life as a thing, an object such as a painting. And there is a particular kernel in current inquiry about, well, what is real? What can we trust? What do we know to be true? And what do we know to be false? And there's something within the language of trompe-l'oeil, of illusionism, that of course approaches that. Well, what is real and what is fake? And when one thinks outside of the genre of still life and into those wonderful trompe-l'oeil frescoes of the Baroque movement, those great visions of angelic realms and angels ascending and descending that one sees in some of those wonderful churches in Rome, and I think of the Jesuit church in Rome that has that spectacular ceiling. And what we see is that representation of a heavenly reality that almost acts almost like a screen. When you look at the surface of the painting, you look beyond to something above, a representation of what you might say a spiritual realm, but that is presented to you as a painting. It's a surface, it's quote-unquote a fake, but with a hope to present something that the artist and those commissioning the art would show something of a greater spiritual reality. And I see that also in the genre of the trompe-l'oeil, in a much more modest sense, in still life. This is a representation of a reality, if you will, perhaps even a spiritual reality at that points towards some of the questions about what's real, what's fake. Let's talk about the nature of mortality. Let's talk about what is beauty. Let's talk about some of these bigger, difficult questions. And let's talk about it in the context of a painting of these everyday objects. Well, I made a painting a few months ago, and it was a painting of detritus that washes up in the River Thames. Objects that have been flowing around in the ocean for so many years. And of course, with the nature of the plastic and the nature of the metal, they never break down. They continually flow in the ocean currents. And these are objects that have come from a certain country in the Far East and have found themselves in London. And I was offered a possibility to exhibit this painting in this country. It's a difficult story in a way, because the painting the images were sent to the country and the painting began the transport over to the country. And there are a few issues where the country decided that they didn't want to show this painting because they felt that it was too politically hot, in so much as it could be perceived as criticising the government at that point. So that the painting actually wasn't shown in that country, and it's now back in the studio. And that's the first time that I've made a painting that's effectively not been allowed into a country. Well, let's talk a bit about how the paintings are made. And I make a drawing most days. Last year I made a commitment to make a drawing every day. And for me, drawing, an observational drawing is very important. So when I draw, I'll draw objects. I'll just draw the stuff that's around me in the studio or at that time, or on the way to the studio, or what's on the kitchen table. And for me, drawing is a way of selecting objects to turn into painting. And it's a way of editing things out, and it's also a way of inquiring into that object. I mean, drawing is a way of really looking at something very carefully for a considered amount of time. Cézanne talked about drawing not so much about making marks, but as a process of seeing. And for me, drawing is a way of seeing. So the paintings begin as a drawing, and from there I'll make sketches of assemblages that I think will make an interesting painting. And then I'll make a still life in the studio itself. So if you come to my studio, and people are always welcome at the studio, you'll see still lives on the wall and on the floor. And then I paint those and I draw those. I paint from observation. I take photographs of those still life assemblages. And then from there I start to work on the painting. So if I'm painting on canvas, it'll begin by making the illusionistic floor, if you will, and I use various techniques and devices to make the wood grain, to paint the wood grain. Actually, tools that are normally used in painting and decorating. And I quite like how there's a coming together of approaches that are normally found in painting and decorating, but then are used in a fine arts approach. And from there, sometimes I'll lay the objects actually onto the painted surface itself. Take a photograph, make some drawings, find an assemblage that works, and then begin by making the paintings of the airplanes or the rags or the postcards or whatever. And so things will be moved around in the painting, so to speak, and through the process of time and elimination, I come to a point where things are ready. And sometimes people ask me, when do you know when a painting is finished? Which is always the question. And for me, a painting's finished when there's nothing that bugs me about the painting. There's nothing that needs to be moved around. It might be a stub from a cinema ticket, that you're about to throw out, but maybe it's a movie that you saw with your lover on your first date, and that's part of your story then, and an interesting thing to paint. Or it could be that it's a newspaper article that's about to get thrown out, but that newspaper article reflects something of that particular moment in time, and as such it's valuable. Or it might be a bit of masking tape that's about to get thrown out, but that masking tape helped you make your masterpiece. So it's a really important piece of masking tape, and it should be talked about, and it's an interesting thing to paint. So yes, indeed, all these things that we surround ourselves with in life that say so much about who we are and what we value and what we want to do. And I get it, we don't want to clutter up our house with all this stuff. But some of these things I think really should be put into paint and should be with us for a lot longer.